Remember when you talked about La Blancanieves?
Yeah.
If you want to just give like a brief rundown of like where it was or like what it was.
It was kind of like a Disneyland, but in Mexico. But there was a lot of bad stuff that would happen in that specific spot. And it was all allegedly because it was built on top of a cemetery, like a graveyard. And there was this one specific statue, which is a Snow White statue.
Yep.
Of La Blancanieves. And she's cursed. So warning, if you don't want to see her, you don't have to.
She moves around and stuff. There's like footage of her like blinking. There's been a recent video of a guy who was around that area exploring it, and then he sees La Blancanieves move.
No way.
No mames, no te muevas ahí.
Yeah, and they're pretty far, bro.
Is that walking on it by itself?
Yes.
Deja que mi cámara enfoque bien, deja que mi cámara enfoque bien. Deja que mi cámara enfoque bien, güey, eso no es el velador. No digas,
Then they run to it.
No
bro, I don't know.
Mamadas,
Such a brave. I would not run to that.
Perdón, perdón.
Run to it, bro.
No digas mamadas, güey.
Nah, bro, that's crazy, bro. You see that, bro? We were just...
You heard about the terrifying terrorist attack that was planned for a Taylor Swift concert recently. If it had gone ahead, it would have killed thousands. Taylor Swift recently embarked on her legendary Eras tour. It started in 2023 and she's been performing all across the globe. She recently graced London with her presence, and adoring fans queued up for days to get a glimpse of the star. However, this could all have easily ended in tragedy. She'd planned to perform in Vienna on the 8th, 9th and 10th of August. To her fans' disappointment though, the shows were cancelled. When people found out why, they were absolutely horrified. A 19-year-old Austrian man was arrested and was said to have links to ISIS. He allegedly plotted to attack fans outside of the stadium and had collected knives and homemade explosive devices. It's believed that when officers searched the suspect's home, they discovered an arsenal of chemical substances and dangerous devices. A 17-year-old and another suspect were also arrested in connection with the plot. Taylor actually spoke out about this and said that thanks to officials, we are grieving concerts, not lives.
If you swim in this, you will die.
100% fatality rate. Every motherfucker who ended up in there has died.
You may not believe it, but this guy is 100% correct. Falling into this is basically a death sentence. This TikTok went viral recently of a guy exploring this dam and explaining how every single person that fell into it died. You might be looking at this and thinking, wow, I could definitely swim in this easily. But I'm here to tell you, you can't. You literally have no chance of surviving swimming in this. This dam is located in Pennsylvania and it's known as the Dock Street Dam. And since 1935, it's taken the lives of 30 people. Granted, this water is not moving very quickly, so it has the illusion of appearing safe. But the way that this wall is built right here is what makes it so deadly. This dam is known as something called a low-head dam. And low-head dams create something known as backwash, which is basically like a washing machine. And if you fall into the water, you're gonna go around in circles until you eventually end up drowning and dying. Backwash is extremely difficult to get out of, so the best course of action here is to stay out of the water. So if you ever see this dam or a dam like it, never go into it.
The true story behind this real mugshot is incredibly disturbing. This is Caius Viovis, otherwise known as Roy Getfinski. I'm gonna call him Roy for the rest of this video. In 2014, Roy was found guilty of murdering and dismembering 3 local men in Massachusetts. As it turns out, Roy was a self-proclaimed Satanist and believed he was a vampire with magical powers. According to prosecutors, Roy helped 2 of his friends kidnap these 3 men and shoot and kill them. As it turns out, one of Roy's close friends was a Hell's Angel Motorcycle Club member. And one of the victims was set to testify against this Hell's Angel member in an assault case in court. But unfortunately, when Roy and his 2 friends went to murder the witness, he had 2 friends with him as well. So that meant that Roy and his murder clique had to kill all 3 of these men. Their names were David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. But this wasn't the first time that Roy had made national headlines for a crime he committed. In 1999, he and his then 17-year-old girlfriend had been accused of assault. Apparently, he and his girlfriend had lured a 16-year-old girl back to their hotel room. They had then sliced the girl's back open with a razor blade, licked the blood off from the wound, and began kissing each other. Police were then called when that 16-year-old girl showed up at a hospital with a 7-inch long gash on her back that required over 30 stitches. And it was back during that trial in the early 2000s when Roy claimed he was a Satanist and a vampire with a thirst for blood. He was then sentenced to 10 years in prison with 3 years suspended. After he was released though and was on parole in 2006, he was arrested again. This time he was arrested for kidnapping and drug possession after he and another male friend held 2 strippers hostage in a hotel room. The kidnapping charges were later dropped, but he was sent back to prison for violating his probation. Then, just a few years later, he would get entangled in this triple homicide, and he was sentenced to life in prison. When images from Roy's home were shown in court, people were somewhat disturbed. Inside of Roy's house, you can see a lot of black candles, ritualistic knives and items, plenty of skulls and crossbones, witchcraft, occult paraphernalia, and a lot of knives and weapons. Now, after Roy was found guilty for his part in these 3 murders, he had some choice words to say to the jury. After hearing the verdict, he looked over at the jury and said, "I'll see you all in hell. Remember that, every effing one of you, I'll see you all in hell." And this whole story makes me wonder what else Roy did in his life that people don't know about yet. Did he have a hand in other crimes? Did he commit other crimes that people don't know about? I don't know, but this story is just flat out disturbing.
Case of Bashir McLean and his mom Tanya Bird. On February 26th of 2013, there was garbage bags with human remains scattered around the Bronx, New York. Garbage bags were discovered by a man who was walking his dog around 4 a.m. in the morning because his dog smelled the garbage bags and stuff, so called the cops, and they don't know who it is exactly just yet.
Who the dead person is? Or
yeah, who the dead person is. And then like the next day, the son, Bashir, he reports his mom missing, and he says that he wasn't able to get in contact with her for the past 24 hours. Like, this is unusual behavior. She's always taking care of his younger sibling because his younger sibling has like disabilities. And then the cops find out who the remains are, which was his mom. They go tell him like the sad news, and when they go to the house, they smell like a ton of bleach. Alarms were ringing and stuff like that. They ended up getting a warrant. They searched the whole house. They searched his phone, and then what they find in his phone is this.
Yo, don't tell me it's a picture of his mom, bro. Bro, I saw that picture, bro.
It's a really, really like infamous picture. Literally him holding his beheaded mom in a selfie. Obviously you see him all like happy and stuff, like psycho. They arrest him. They ask him, what the fuck did he do it? What was the motive?
What was the reason? Yeah.
He confesses, and he's like, when he was a kid, like a baby, his mom...
You know the chilling child abduction story behind the Amber Alert system? It was January the 13th, 1996 in Arlington, Texas. Amber Hagerman was just 9 years old. She'd been biking around the area near to her nan's house with her 5-year-old brother Ricky. She had a new bike that she'd been given for Christmas, so she was really enjoying playing on it. Now, the pair were cycling up and down. They weren't going too far, but it was obviously a different time back then, and children used to just play freely outside. However, within seconds, this innocent bike ride would turn deadly. Ricky told his family later that he saw his sister bike into a car park and then vanish. Another eyewitness from the scene saw much more than that. A man in his 70s reported seeing the child get grabbed by a man in a black truck. The man looked in his 20s or 30s, according to the witness. The witness then obviously promptly phoned police. Despite a big search for the little girl, they had absolutely no idea where she'd gone. They kept hunting and found nothing until a dog walker stumbled upon something horrific 4 days later. Tragically, in a nearby creek was little Amber's body. She'd been stripped and her throat cut by either a knife or a screwdriver. Her body was found less than 5 miles away from where she was snatched. Now, police desperately searched for leads but came up with absolutely nothing. The local community were really anxious to try and do something to help. In the absence of being able to track down Amber's killer, a local woman, Diane Simone, rang into a local radio station. She wondered if a national alert system could be created to send information to people about missing children, like they do for severe weather warnings. With that, the AMBER system was born. The acronym stood for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. Tragically, Amber's murder still remains unsolved 28 years later. However, the Amber Alert created in her honour has gone on to save many more children who may have otherwise ended up dead.
disturbing short film on YouTube, Bad Boy Oliver. And this one is inspired by the boy in the camera. It starts off with this boy, his name is Oliver, who's trying to visit his aunt and his uncle. He takes the bus by himself. Keep in mind he's only 8 years old. He arrives. He's greeted at the door by Auntie Pat and Uncle Charles. And they're like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen you, Oliver, in a very long time. It's already kind of weird though because of how they're made, the facial expressions and stuff like that. It gives you a uncanny valley type of feeling. They show him to the room where he's going to be staying at. All you see is like his facial expression kind of change like to a scared face, and he's like, oh, what is that? His uncle's like, that's Mr. Bobo. And it's like a scary looking mouse rat doll, and the uncle's just like, oh, don't worry about it, it's just a childhood toy that we had for a very long time. Me and your father loved it. Fast forward to him sleeping now. He wakes up, he looks around, nothing is there now, and he's like saying to himself, he's not real, this is just a dream. And then it's like a little scene where Mr. Bobo is just standing at the edge of the bed looking at him and shit. Wakes up the next morning, it was just a dream because Mr. Bobo is in the same spot that he was. And then he starts playing with his toy tractor. He's like, I'm not scared of you, you're not real. Throws his toy tractor at it. Mr. Bobo falls from the cabinet and he sees a blinking red light in his eye.
Shut the fuck up, bro.
He takes off the eye of Mr. Bobo and he sees a small camera in there. Out of nowhere, behind him, the door opens and it's Uncle Charles with like a weird, emotionless face. And he's just staring at him. And he's like, Uncle Charles, why does Mr. Bobo have a camera in his eye? He's like, ah, if only you would have been a good boy. I wouldn't have to do what I have to do now.
No fucking way.
The door shuts and he's like, Uncle Charles? Like, but it's like muffled. And then it switches to the scene where he's like kind of chained to the...
These are the most disturbing cartel execution videos on the internet, part 1. This video is called Ghost Rider, and it's one of the most infamous cartel execution videos, and I really don't recommend looking or searching for it because it's 100% one of the worst. The video was recorded in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured over 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. We all put rubbing alcohol on cuts, and we all know how bad it hurts. So just imagine having your face skinned and then somebody pours rubbing alcohol all over it. After this, the killers then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is then completely covered in flames and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day or a couple days later, and Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no facial features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this torture. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. And seeing his exposed red skull burning is a very disturbing sight. Apparently the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the main reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is just horrible and extremely gruesome, and it's a video you should definitely stay curious on because in my opinion, it's that bad.
I need everyone to stop what you're doing and listen to this. This is 4-year-old Lucian James Munguia, and he's been missing from Yakima, Washington since September 10th. That evening, at around 7:15 p.m., Lucian and his siblings, along with their parents, were at Sarge Hubbard Park. Lucian was rolling down a grassy hill with his older brother when his dad quickly went back to the car, which was parked right in front of the playground, to change his youngest child's diaper. When he returned, Lucian was nowhere to be found. After searching frantically for 15 minutes, he called 911 to report Lucian missing. This was at 7:30 p.m. The Yakima police came right away, and more than 100 search and rescuers began looking for little Lucian, but there was no sign of him. This is especially troubling because Lucian is autistic and has limited verbal communication. In the now 4 days that he's been missing, the Yakima police, as well as 6 other counties and even the U.S. Air Force, have thoroughly searched Sarge Hubbard Park, any businesses nearby, which included a Walmart, the Yakima Greenway, which is a trail that spans over 20 miles, multiple homeless encampments, and multiple bodies of water. This includes 2 ponds at the park, a lake, and the Yakima River, which is also extremely close to the park. Authorities have brought in bloodhounds, cadaver dogs, have used drones, underwater drones, ATVs, dive teams, and have searched by boat and helicopter. But absolutely no trace of Lucian has been found. He was missing for 15 minutes. Authorities checked security footage from nearby businesses and somehow determined that Lucian left the park alone and walked south and east. Because of this, authorities do not suspect foul play, but it's now been 4 days and Lucian has still not been found, so anything is a possibility. The area Lucian went missing in isn't the safest neighborhood, and there have been reports of a creepy man at the park earlier the day Lucian disappeared who followed a young boy into the bathroom. But I'm not sure if this has ever been confirmed or if the police have looked into it. We just want to bring Lucian home safe. He was last seen wearing a long-sleeved blue shirt with a shark on it, blue shorts, and black Skechers. He has long black hair and brown eyes. As I mentioned before, Lucian is autistic and has limited verbal communication, but according to his mom Sandra, he will respond to his name, or if you say, quote, "Do you want to go bye-bye in mommy's new car?" End quote. Unfortunately, YPD officially announced they'll be scaling back their search efforts, so it really comes down to us and the Yakima community to find Lucian. If you were at Sarge Hubbard Park on September 10th and took any photos possibly showing Lucian, please email them to yp@yakimawa.gov. Absolutely nothing is too small. There is a Facebook page tracking updates, and a GoFundMe is set up for Lucian's parents to help continue funding the search. That's linked in my bio if you'd like to donate or possibly share. Please help bring Lucian home.
This is the most notorious priest in all of Australia, Bernard McGrath. And because people roast me for this, he is considered to be the notorious offender in the most notorious religious order in Australia. And yes, he's a pedophile, of course. Bernard was born in 1947 in Christchurch, New Zealand, and his father was a butcher who was previously involved with the church and wanted his son to live a life according to God and be involved with the church himself. So in 1968, Bernard took his vows, and in early 1969, he became a scholastic and worked in psychiatric wards. Keep in mind, he had taken a vow of chastity, but he reported that during his time here, he had a sexual relationship with another man, a fellow priest named Brother Berkmans Moynihan. So in 1974, he was transferred to the Maryland School in Christchurch. The prior at the school was Brother Roger Maloney. And apparently, in his years at the school, Roger had fostered an environment of sexual abuse and terror. Roger Maloney would eventually be convicted of child sex abuse, but he allegedly forced Bernard to perform sex acts on him, just to keep his job. But even though written complaints were made about Roger and Bernard, nothing happened, and Roger was eventually transferred to the Vatican to work as a pharmacist. And after sexually abusing kids at this school, Bernard was transferred to another school for disadvantaged kids. By the way, this is a picture of Bernard and Roger, if you were wondering. So in 1981, Bernard became the headmaster of a school named Kendall Grange. And it was here where he had access to hundreds of disadvantaged boys who lived there on property. And he sexually abused a majority of these young boys. Parents made complaints that they heard that the headmaster was touching their children, but nothing was ever done about this. In 1992, however, Bernard was brought to a meeting with Father Brian Lucas. At the time, a lot of people had been reporting that priests and brothers had been touching children inside of churches, so Lucas was kind of the figurehead for the church's response, and he was trying to remediate all of these actions. And when Bernard met with him, he said that there would be a lot of allegations coming out against him, and so he was sent to a rehabilitation center in America. But then in 1993, legal troubles began for Bernard. All of his victims began to come forward, and he was imprisoned for a number of years. This would be his first of 5 different trials that he was involved with that lasted from 1993 all the way up to 2019. And in total, he would be sentenced to about 68 years in prison for over 100 counts of abuse against boys. Obviously, he abused hundreds of children, but these were just the accounts that they could prove. And some of these accounts of the abuse are absolutely horrific. I can't read them here on TikTok, but he did terrible, terrible things to these young children. So Bernard was a part of the St. John of God order, and there were a ton of different members of this order that were eventually convicted of child sex abuse. I mean, take a look here. These are just a few of the members that were convicted eventually as well. But one of the most shocking things about this case is the cover-up. So as far back as 1977, people were reporting that Bernard was touching children in these schools. And even though this was brought up to many people in powerful positions, they always transferred Bernard, attempted to silence parents and other people that were reporting this abuse. And yeah, they never reported him to police. Thank God, though, that now he's in prison. A real man of God.
These are the worst videos online you should never Google, and this is a massive trigger warning. This is the Miss Pac-Man video, and it details the final moments of woman Alejandro Eco Chubb, who was 32 years old and a mother of 3 and was involved in an abusive relationship with her partner Mario Osvaldo. The abuse was so bad her neighbors and local people knew about it but did nothing about it. On October 29th, 2018, Mario murdered Alejandra in a brutal, savage attack. Neighbors heard Alejandra's screams and rushed to the scene and saw Alejandra with horrific injuries and, in addition, had both of her hands cut off. The neighbors recorded the situation and it soon went viral on social media. The video is called Miss Pac-Man and it's extremely graphic and it's just nightmarish to watch. The video is short at 1 minute and 30 seconds long and it shows the aftermath of the awful attack Alejandra just suffered. As you play the video, the person filming, who is a local villager, is panning the camera down and focusing on a severed hand that is on the floor. In the background, you hear awful screaming and crying from other locals who walked in on the scene. The camera then pans down to the bed which Alejandra is lying on, and immediately you see how awful her injuries really are. Both of her hands have been cut off and she's been struck in the face with a machete. She was hit horizontally below her eyes and in the middle of her nose. It's so disturbing and it's hard to explain. Essentially, Alejandra was hit so hard with the machete that it made her head look like Pac-Man opening his mouth, which is why the video is titled this. But somehow she is still alive as she lays in the blood-soaked bed. She tries to scream but she can't, and her eyes dart around the room in panic and fear as she lets out horrific groaning sounds. The groans are hard to explain, but it sounds like an animal, like a cat fighting. You hear blood bubbles as she tries to breathe. The camera continues to focus on her, and the combination of the brutality on the screen, the painful sounds Alejandra is making, and also the screams of the villagers in the background is just extremely disturbing. And to make it worse, apparently her 3 children were present when Mario brutally attacked their mother. At one point in the video, Alejandra turns her head slightly as she lays in pain, and you then see how deep the gash in her head really is. The cut is so deep that it almost meets her ears. It's literally 3/4 of the way into her head. The whole video is just disturbing, gruesome, and it's something you just don't want to see. This video is definitely one of the worst videos on the internet, and even though you don't see the act committed on camera, seeing the aftermath of it is absolutely traumatizing. Alejandra was pronounced dead after the video was taken, and Mario was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the brutal crime. Whatever you do, please don't go searching for this video. It's way different than videos I explain because it feels like a real-life horror movie. Trust me when I say this, just please don't search it up. Rest in peace to Alejandra Eco Chubb, and I can't believe this is reality.
Dude, every hair in my body is standing up.
What was that noise?
That was a growl or a screech. That literally was like, oh my god, dude. Whoa. Dude, what is that, bro? What the f is that? Those were like, I hate to use the D word, but those were not human vocalizations that we just heard. That's fucked. Did we just hear your voice? Oh god, the shadow just scared me. Did we just hear your voice out there? Can you make that noise again? better not asking that. Is it a bad idea for us to take the rosary off of this doll? Dude, those sounds were straight demonic. And it was in this fucking hallway, bro. That was closer than the Hill House was. Oh God, what's it about to say? You should go. You should go, is what it just said to us. Dude, I'm shaking, bro.
I really don't like this.
Why should we go? Is it dangerous to be in here?
What's a crime that happened near you that everyone should know about? I'll go first. This is Kai Zhuang. He's a Chinese foreign exchange student that was staying in Riverdale, Utah when he was cyber kidnapped last week. Kai was reported missing by his high school in Riverdale last Thursday after his family in China told school officials that they received a ransom note and a photo of Kai being held captive and in danger. The ransom note demanded $80,000, which his family paid. Upon investigating, Riverdale police went to the home of Kai's host family, but according to them, they had no idea that Kai was missing. They told authorities that he was sleeping in his bed Wednesday night and could hear him in his room Thursday morning. Police initially thought that he had been forcibly taken from his host home and was being held against his will, but that was not the case. Just a week prior, Kai was stopped by police in Provo, Utah, where they were concerned for his safety for some reason. He was purchasing camping gear and he was ultimately returned to his host family. After learning about this encounter, police used phone data and bank records to piece together where Kai could have possibly gone, because at this point it seemed as if he was trying to go off-grid. Just Sunday morning, Kai was found alive in a makeshift tent in the Utah mountains just outside of Brigham City. According to police, he was very scared and cold as there was no source of heat in the tent outside of a blanket. He also had very little food and water. Inside the tent, police also found multiple phones, which they believe he used to take the photos that were sent to his family in China. Kai told police that he was told by the cyber kidnappers to isolate himself, which he agreed to because he was scared that they were going to hurt him or his family. He said that he was being controlled and manipulated by these kidnappers for weeks, even during the encounter with Provo police, but he didn't tell them or his host family because he was scared. Riverdale police state that he was specifically targeted because he was a foreign exchange student, and he became the subject of an international online kidnapping scheme. After his rescue, he was cleared medically at the scene, made contact with his family back home, and he requested a warm cheeseburger to eat. According to the FBI, cyber kidnapping schemes are happening more and more across the US, and these cyber kidnappers are specifically targeting Chinese exchange students online, threatening their families back home. If you don't know, cyber kidnapping is when an online kidnapper or attacker tells a victim to isolate themselves and to provide them with photos as if they were being held captive. They then send these photos to the victim's family members in exchange for payment, and the victims usually go along with this out of fear of themselves or their families being harmed. Authorities are urging anyone who may be a victim of cyber kidnapping to stop contact with the suspect, don't send them money, and to immediately contact local authorities.
Hillsborough disaster is one of the most infuriating and heartbreaking true crime cases I know. Hillsborough Stadium is located in Sheffield. It was April 1989. The stadium was about to host an FA Cup semi-final game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Now the game was obviously highly anticipated and there were loads of fans there eager to cheer their teams on. Now some people actually don't know this, but in 1981 a crush occurred at the ground. This was actually again during a FA Cup game, but it was between Spurs and Wolves. There were 38 injuries, including broken limbs. Luckily no one was killed, but this time the result was fatal. Just prior to kick-off, staff realised there were loads of fans that hadn't yet made it into the ground. Police Commander David Duckenfield ordered that Gate C would be opened. This caused around 2,000 Liverpool fans to surge into the stadium, causing a massive crash. I feel like it's best to get the words of a Hillsborough survivor in order to paint the picture of the true horrors that then unfolded. A Liverpool fan, Neil McDougall, was interviewed. He stated, "I remember watching on in horror and seeing fans on the pitch using advertising hoardings as emergency stretchers. When I looked out across the pitch, it was like a war zone. Bodies were laid out everywhere and they were being carried down to the far end of the stadium. There were people crying everywhere, walking about the pitch in a state of shock." He said, "People were running around in circles in sheer desperation, doing their best to help those who were dying. Every so often you'd hear a small cheer as someone was brought back to life on the pitch, only to fade away again. It was like watching a war scene in a movie, but it wasn't a war, it was only a football match, and those people should have never been killed. They should have been safe. Something went horribly wrong on that day." There were a total of 97 deaths and 766 injuries. Now, not only were the deaths themselves an absolute tragedy, but the way that it was handled by police and other professionals was absolutely horrendous. There was complete chaos in identifying the deceased victims. Bodies of people's loved ones were transported to a local gymnasium which acted as a temporary mortuary. Some relatives were made to look through Polaroid pictures of the deceased to identify their loved ones. Other relatives were placed in a holding room, and a hospital administrator came out, stood on a table and started reading descriptions of people in the mortuary. The oldest victim was 67 and the youngest was just 10. Now, in the immediate aftermath of this horrendous tragedy, police and the press spread false stories painting the victims as perpetrators of crimes. The Sun newspaper is now infamous of the absolutely disgusting false stories that they printed about the victims. They lied and made out like the victims were somehow to blame for this, when in actual fact it was a failure of crowd control. The first inquest into the disaster from 1991 stated a verdict of accidental death. Fans and loved ones of the deceased fought to have this overturned for years. Finally, in 2016, it was concluded that the victims were unlawfully killed. Fans played no part in the deaths, and instead it was down to police failures, poor stadium design and a delayed response by the ambulance. There's an absolutely brilliant drama on ITV called Anne, and if you're interested in this disaster, it paints such a good picture of what actually happened and how heartbreaking it was. But just as a disclaimer, I did cry the whole way through.
A missing North Carolina teenager was just found hidden under a trap door in this man's home in a completely different state, and what he has to say about it is horrifying.
She hid on her own free will. She was actually in the bed when the officers first come in there. Her grandma kicked her out. She didn't appear to be that age. She had all kinds of piercings.
In December, a 16-year-old girl left her grandparents' home in North Carolina after a fight and disappeared. She was officially reported missing on December 6th, and her grandparents feared the worst. But what they didn't know was that 3 weeks prior to her disappearance, a 34-year-old man named Zachary Jones found the girl online and started talking to her, and he actually lured her from her home after the fight with her grandparents. Zachary then drove the girl all the way back to his home in Lincoln County, Kentucky, where he repeatedly sexually assaulted her and gave her drugs. Fast forward to Christmas Day. Zachary's mom called 911 to report a domestic violence incident between Zachary and who she thought was his girlfriend. And when police arrived at the home, he said the girl was not there. He was quickly cuffed and placed in the back of a cop car after authorities found drugs in the home. And when they went back inside to search for the girl, they found something incredibly disturbing. Locked inside of a trap door hidden under a rug in Zachary's bedroom was a young girl who authorities say appeared very high. After investigating, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office realized that the young girl was reported missing nearly a month prior out of North Carolina. According to the girl, whose name has not been released, she said that Zachary initially told her that he was 19 online, but when she met up with him in North Carolina, he looked much older. It was there that he said he was 25, and it wasn't until they got all the way back to his home that she found out that he was actually 34. The girl said that Zachary was always armed with a gun and that he forced her to tell his family that she was 18. He also threatened to kill her many times and proceeded to sexually assault her and give her drugs, sometimes even strangling her during the assaults. When the girl was rescued, Zachary denied choking her and said that she hid in the trap door on her own free will, but the girl had very visible marks on her neck that proved otherwise. The victim also said that on their drive back to his house, they were pulled over by a cop, and Zachary told her that he would shoot the officer if they were asked to get out of the car. Zachary was arrested and is being held at the Pulaski County Jail, while the girl was taken to the hospital for treatment and was reunited with her grandparents. In an interview from jail, Zachary admitted to all of it, but said that she told him that that she was 18. He said that she didn't look to be 16 as she had all sorts of piercings, and that he was helping her after her grandparents kicked her out, which was not true. Zachary is facing 30 different charges in just Kentucky, but he's also facing more charges in North Carolina as well. He's being held without bond, and judging by his lack of remorse, I truly hope that he never gets out, because this story is absolutely terrifying.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This woman vanished after meeting someone she met on Facebook. 39-year-old Melissa Lemoine was last seen in Tampa, Florida on the 14th of July 2023. She had been living in Lutz, which is around 15 miles away from Tampa. On the afternoon in question, a family member had dropped her off at the Frontier Travel Park on Nebraska Avenue. She had apparently been planning to meet with someone that she had met online on Facebook. The pair had apparently been speaking for a while, and it was planned that she would come straight back home that day. Now, the person that she had been communicating with remains unknown, and Melissa never made it back that day. She has not been seen or heard from since. Obviously concerned when she never came home, her family reported her missing straight away. They've made numerous calls to Melissa's phone to try and get hold of her, and originally the phone was ringing out, but now it just goes straight to answer phone. Anyone with any information, no matter how small they think it might be, is encouraged to get in contact with the police.
This is the disturbing truth about Danny Phantom. Okay, so we all know who Danny Phantom is and Timmy Turner. But have you ever wondered why they look exactly the same? Well, that's because the show Danny Phantom is actually Timmy Turner's life as a teenager. After Timmy made his last wish to make him and all of his friends superheroes, Timmy grew up to be Danny Phantom, Chester grew up to be Dash, Trixie grew up to be Paulina, Tootie grew up to be Sam, and AJ grew up to be Tucker. And all of these characters kinda look exactly the same, just in different grown-up versions. And the crazy thing is, you can actually see them grown up in Danny Phantom. Many people believe this to be true, and others don't believe it at all. Like, for example, the eye colors are completely different, and even the skin tone on some of the characters. But what do you think about this? Do you think Danny Phantom is just Timmy Turner grown up? And if so, let me know in the comments. Everybody loved these two shows, and just imagine if they were actually connected. In my opinion, this theory is absolutely mind-blowing, and I kinda hope it turns out to be true.
I accidentally killed my husband by pushing him from the 25th floor during an argument. My name is Amber Hilberling, and I was 19 years old at the time. My story is a mix of tragedy and injustice. On that day, my husband and I were in the midst of a dispute, and there had been instances in the past where he had been physically abusive towards me. At just 19 years old and 5 months pregnant, the worst happened. Throughout our 11 months of marriage, my husband Joshua, a former military personnel, made my life a living hell due to the domestic violence he subjected me to. During that fatal argument, Joshua violently grabbed me, and in a reflex of self-defense, I pushed him, causing him to fall from the 25th floor of our building through a window in our apartment that shattered upon impact. During my trial, investigators cast doubt on the jurors' minds by mentioning that nothing in the living room indicated a violent dispute had taken place. Consequently, I was sentenced to 25 years in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. I gave birth to our son while in custody. I appealed the decision, but my request was denied in 2014. The loneliness and pain of watching my child grow up far from me overwhelmed me. I was found dead in my cell, hanged at the age of 24.
When marriage turns to murder, this is the horrific story of Angie and Jared. Angie was just 21 when her new husband beheaded her, just 3 months after they got married. Angie and Jared got married in October 2022 in a ceremony that friends and family weren't invited to. Friends of Angie described Jared as quite jealous and controlling, and he treated Angie like a possession. Angie recently told a friend that she wanted to have kids with Jared, but her friend advised her to get to know him more and just enjoy being a couple. There had been previous disturbances reported at their home, but nothing major. However, Angie's friends do believe she was a victim of domestic violence leading up to her death. Officers were called out to their home on January 11th. Jared was at the scene, and when officers went inside, they found the headless body of Angie. She was found laid on their bedroom floor in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. Her head was found in the shower. Bizarrely, there is CCTV footage from the store where Angie worked that shows Jared walk in, grab a beer from the fridge, walk out without paying, drink it in the parking lot, and then drive away. This footage is thought to be just after Angie's death. Jared was arrested for Angie's murder and he did confess to killing her. His bond is currently set at $500,000.
This man cut his mum up, ate her, and also fed her to his dog. Alberto Gomez is a 30-year-old former Spanish waiter. In 2019, when he was just 26 years old, a shocking crime was exposed. Police were called to his family home in Madrid in February 2019. Alberto's mum, Maria Gomez, hadn't been seen for a while. Her concerned friend had called the police to request a welfare check on her. Police searched her property and found something absolutely horrifying. Maria's body parts had been chopped up into tiny pieces and stored in plastic Tupperware tubs. Her head, hands, and heart were found on the bed. It's reported that she'd been cut up into over 1,000 tiny pieces. Now, Alberto was dubbed the cannibal killer after he made a shocking confession to the police. When interviewed, he admitted to strangling his mother to death. He also confessed to dismembering her, and horrifically, he admitted to eating her remains. He said some were cooked and some were raw, and he shared them with his dog. He used a carpenter's saw and 2 kitchen knives to dismember his mother's body. It was revealed in court that he did regularly take substances and had been arrested 12 times for mistreating his mother. He'd also breached restraining orders multiple times. He claimed that he had been experiencing a psychotic episode during the killing. However, the jury rejected this claim and he was given 15 years and 5 months in prison. When addressing the court, he said, "I'm very repentant. I suffer anxiety from the moment I wake up. I think of my mum and I'm absolutely heartbroken."
This is the elevator video, one of the worst elevator accidents caught on camera explained. This video is about 40 seconds long and it takes place in India. It was filmed on an elevator CCTV camera. The video starts with 3 young children in the elevator going to their apartment. But before I continue, I'm going to explain the elevator design because it's extremely unsafe and dangerous. The elevator has a gate that you have to pull open when you get to your floor. And once the metal gate opens, you have to open the door to your floor. So entering and exiting the elevator is a manual process. The doors don't open automatically. But let's continue. 2 of the children safely get off the elevator, but the last child, as he's exiting the elevator, he decides to close the metal gate, but when he does this, the door to his floor also closes. So he's trapped between both doors. Some people think the door was closed by his siblings as a prank, which unintentionally trapped the young boy. The boy remained stuck for a couple of seconds, and then the elevator began to move. The boy instinctively tries to grab something to hold, but as the elevator begins changing floors, the boy's body starts to twist and bend in unimaginable ways and is completely crushed by the elevator. And that is where the video ends. It's an extremely horrible video, and emotionally it hits pretty deep. This child was only 5 years old when this happened, and I can't imagine the pain and sadness his family felt. It's just so heartbreaking, but just imagine his siblings actually played a prank on him. Can you imagine the guilt they will be feeling for the rest of their lives? Please don't go searching for this video because it's extremely disturbing and just sad. Hopefully me explaining it lures your curiosity away and you don't go looking for it, because in all honesty, this video will definitely stick with you.
The police received this disturbing phone call. They found a horrific scene. Lily James was a 21-year-old student and water polo coach from New South Wales. She went to Andrews Cathedral School and was a vibrant and outgoing girl. One of her friends described her as the nicest, kindest girl. She started dating fellow sports coach Paul Thiessen. She was dating him for around 5 weeks before her tragic death. Paul was 24 and was a former student of the same school. Lily had decided that she didn't wish to continue dating Paul and asked to just be friends. However, alarm bells would ring for her family when she didn't return home on the 25th of October 2023. That evening, police received a very disturbing call. It was almost midnight and Paul had phoned police to report a body at the school. He apparently informed them that it needed to be investigated. Police rushed to the scene and found Lily's body in the school toilets. They deemed her death to be homicide and she'd been beaten with a hammer so badly she was unrecognisable. The next day they identified her body officially and they would begin the process of searching for evidence. CCTV captured Lily walking into the bathroom of the school that night at 7 p.m. Paul followed her into the bathroom and she was never seen alive again. Paul left the bathroom and it was discovered that he used Lily's phone to text her dad asking for a lift. Paul then drove away, dumping a backpack and the murder weapon. Chillingly, it would later be determined that Paul had actually been to a shop to buy a hammer the day of the murder, showing premeditation. After placing the disturbing 911 call, Paul vanished. A day later, a huge search began of the local area. On the 27th of October, another body was found. This time it was Paul. He'd taken his own life after taking Lily's. A group of tradesmen had spotted his body from a distance and he was identified through fingerprints. Lily's family have set up a GoFundMe in her memory.
There's a special place in hell for people like this man. No amount of jail time could ever be enough for killing your own child. But James Dearman, 31, received a 20-year sentence in Florida for doing just that. James regularly dished out punishments to his 2 children when they didn't behave the way that he wanted them to. But on Christmas Eve 2015, these punishments took a sinister turn for 6-year-old Jimmy. Jimmy and his 7-year-old sibling had been told to go to bed so that their dad and his girlfriend could play video games. But when the couple heard the children playing in their room instead of sleeping, they decided that they needed to be punished. They brought the children back into the living area and told them to stand with their noses against the wall. But being a 6-year-old child, Jimmy couldn't resist turning his head to look at the TV screen and see what his dad was playing. He was spotted by James and the punishment was ramped up. Jimmy was thrown onto the sofa and forced to lie on his side with his chest and face pushed into the cushions. Ashley then sat on his legs while his dad James sat on his back and shoulders. According to Jimmy's sibling, he was screaming and shouting and telling his dad that he couldn't breathe, and after a few minutes he became silent and motionless. The couple then went outside to smoke and returned around 10 minutes later to find Jimmy completely unresponsive with blue lips. They dialed 911 and when paramedics arrived, they found James performing CPR, but it was too late. James told police that he hadn't intended on killing Jimmy and that he just wanted to punish him. And according to Ashley, this form of punishment was dished out quite a lot and referred to the couple as squishing. Only this time it had gone too far and resulted in Jimmy's death. James was charged with manslaughter in 2016 and in October of that year, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. The video that I'm about to show you is extremely disturbing. This is Kevin Cosgrove's phone call from the 105th floor of the World Trade Center 2. He was trapped on his floor after the World Trade Center got hit by an airplane. You can hear him getting more and more annoyed and frustrated with the dispatcher throughout these few minutes, and it unfortunately ends abruptly when the tower begins to collapse. You hear his last moments of life as he says he's too young to die. This really puts into perspective how scary and terrible 9/11 was. May all the victims rest in peace, and here's the audio clip.
So you can conserve your oxygen, okay? Try to take God to blow you in from the list. It's really bad. It's black. It's out. Does anybody else want to try it in here? We're young men. We're not ready to die. I'm good. I don't need to get my ass down. I need oxygen. They have a lot of apparatus on the It doesn't feel like it, lady. You get them in from all over. Get them in from Jersey. I don't believe you're Ohio. Okay, so what's your last name? Mine's Cosgrove. I must have called about a dozen times already. Cosgrove. Yeah, my wife thinks I'm all right. I called her and said I was leaving the building. I was fine, and bang. Well, I want to go down. Yeah. Cherry. Dead Cherry. Is that right? Yeah. Dead Cherry's next to me. 105. Who's office? John Ashfield's office. That's what you said. That's the office. We're in John Ashfield's office. OST. ARU. ARU. Right. That's the office we're in. There's three of us in here. OST. ARU. Hello? Hello? We're looking at financial center. Three of us, two broken windows. Message number 100.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This story about unsolved murders and abuse ring found in Michigan and other things that the government has covered up is going to blow your mind. Now, this is part 3 of the story, so if you haven't seen the other parts, go watch them because it's important, but let's get back to Christopher Bush. Christopher Bush is a very important figure in this whole conspiracy, so hold on a second. I got to fill you in on the Oakland County child killings. So at the same time that kids were being flown out to that private island, they were being filmed doing extremely horrific things with adults, they were being abused. These 4 children went missing and were later found murdered in the same area. And to this day, this case has never been solved. It's called the Oakland County child killings. It's really horrific. It's really disturbing. So each of these children were abducted on a snowy night. Their bodies were found later on, days later, in public places, and they had either been strangled or shot. And interestingly, they had all been bathed, they were fully clothed, and only the 2 boys had been assaulted. Some witnesses saw the children getting into a blue Gremlin, an old vehicle, with a man who resembled this, and they never found the guy, obviously. As time went on and children kept going missing and being found murdered, it gripped the communities in this area in Michigan, and it actually resulted in one of the largest manhunts ever at the time. But still, with suspect sketches, cars, everything, nobody was ever caught. And now we get back to this guy, Harold Lee Bush, an executive with General Motors, one of the biggest employers in the area at the time, very wealthy, very politically connected, and his son, Christopher Bush. Now, at the time when the Oakland County child killings were going on, Christopher Bush had recently been arrested. He was under suspicion of producing CP, if you know what I mean. He had assaulted children violently, and he was just a horrible person. And it's been alleged many, many times in the past that since the Oakland County child killings were happening 76 to 77, and this ring of CP production was happening on a nearby island from 76 to 77, they were connected. Some people believe that the children were being abducted, they were being brought out to this island, their deaths and the other things that happened to them were being filmed and sold to customers. And like I said before, Francis Sheldon, the pioneer of that whole CP ring, he fled the country and he was never questioned. He never gave any closure to the case. And this brings us back to Chris Bush. Now Chris Bush, the son of the executive, the guy that was under all this investigation and scrutiny for the abuse and for allegedly filming children, he unalived himself in 1978. But when police found the scene of his unaliving, it was highly suspicious. First of all, there was a bullet wound in the center of his forehead. He had allegedly unalived himself with a rifle, but there were 4 bullet casings found in his room. 4. There was no blood splatter on the sheets in his bed. There was no brain matter, nothing like that in the surrounding area. And I'm about to run out of time, but I got to show you the last thing that they found in the room that to me sells this whole thing that it wasn't an actual unaliving. This island has one of the most disturbing histories in America, and no one really knows the full truth behind it. So like I said before, this island was owned by multi-millionaire Francis Sheldon, pictured right here. And Francis and a number of other local men from Michigan, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, ran a boys' camp on the island. They would fly kids to the island on this airstrip, kids from the YMCA and other schools and communities in the area. And both the children and the parents of the children who attended this boys' camp were told that this was an island of fun where kids could relax. They had big brothers there. It was going to be totally safe. And this camp ran on this island for a period of years. Then one day, some of the kids who attended the camp began to tell their parents that the counselors or the teachers, the adults that were there on the island, had behaved with them in very, very inappropriate ways. They began telling their friends and parents that they were taken into these cabins pictured here on the island. They were assaulted, they were told to remove all of their clothing, and that there were cameras all over the place. Well, it turns out that this guy, the multi-millionaire with political and business connections in the area, Francis Sheldon, was running a massive CP ring. And they had been abusing the children on this island under the guise of bringing them to a boys' camp for years, recording all of it, selling it across the world. And some of the more affluent clients of their business were even allowed to take trips to the island themselves to see some of these young boys. Now, this story bears an obvious resemblance to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, but there are some very, very strange things that are happening here that nobody knows about, and the government still refuses to talk about to this day. So let's talk about this guy, Gerald S. Richards. He was a gym teacher at a local Catholic school who went down for the crimes, and he was heavily involved with every aspect of this business, if you know what I mean. Well, it seems like through his political and business connections, Francis Sheldon was actually tipped off that he was about to be arrested and raided and charged with these horrific crimes. So Francis, before he could be brought to justice for these crimes, he actually fled the country in a personal plane. He then moved to France, got remarried, and died in Amsterdam, and never had to pay for any of the crimes that were committed here. But it's when we start talking about the murders that this story really starts to blow my mind. So take a good look at this guy, Chris Bush. This is Christopher Bush's father, Harold Lee Bush. Now, he was an executive with General Motors, and the family was obviously extremely wealthy. They were politically connected, and they were very connected to every business in the area. These guys had a lot of power. But back to Christopher Bush. This guy had assaulted a number of children. He'd been let out of prison, let out of jail in a very, very suspicious way multiple times, put on bail for serious offenses. And he was an alleged associate of the crime ring that was happening on North Fox Island. Meaning that, like I said earlier, he was one of those people who could afford to actually fly out to the island to do things himself. I'm out of time. Follow for part 3. This is where it gets juicy. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and essay at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was essaying him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the essaying or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it. This pedophile was so terrible that when he was released from prison, they actually put out a public safety warning, warning people to stay away from this guy. This is James Alfred Cooper, who Canadian officials nicknamed the worst pedophile in Canadian history. So back in 1903, James was convicted of the brutal essays and torture of 6 children in Canada. And apparently he had used a number of torture devices to keep these kids from talking. He had used a cat o' nine tails, a cow whip, a cattle prod, belts, and sticks. I mean, 6 victims, they all went through so much, and this guy was responsible for all of it. James's background is shrouded in mystery. Nobody knows too much about what he went through as a kid, but he was convicted of assault when he was 22 years old back in 1958, and years later, his criminal career started out with burglary. So at first, when he would break into houses, he would just steal things for the thrill of it. He would take family photos, he would take fridge magnets, items from the kitchen. But that evolved into him wanting to wake up the people that he was robbing. He would stand over these people's beds, wake them up violently in the middle of the night, and then escape out of a window or through the door that he broke in through. But that evolved into a desire to SA people inside of their own homes. At one point, he SA'd a minor in their own home at knife point after waking them up in the middle of the night. He also did the same thing to a single mother while holding her at knife point. I mean, this guy was terrible and would only get worse. At one point, though, he married a woman named Patricia, who already had 3 kids. He would eventually have another child with her, and this is when the abuse of children began. And this is when the abuse really started. He would use these horrific tools to actually torture and abuse the children that were living under his own roof. And he did these mind games with the kids. He even made them eat things like their own excrement out of their pants while everybody in the house watched. I mean, this guy was sick and twisted. I mean, there's so much to the story that is so graphic and disturbing that I cannot talk about it here on TikTok. If you want to look it up, there's a great article online that explains this whole case, and it's just really hard to get through. But he would even do things like buy tubs of ice cream, rub it on his body, and make his children lick it off of him. He even at one point invited a neighborhood girl over with one of his own children, and he essayed both of them. Keep in mind, this whole time he was also physically abusing the children, beating them, he was verbally abusing them. He was just the worst person. I can't even get that across how bad of a guy this dude was. Eventually, though, in 1987, he finally was arrested and charged with doing all of these horrible things. Eventually, DNA would link him to some of the break-ins that he had committed as well, and the assaults that he had committed during those break-ins. And at the time, he was given a 30-year sentence. Now, that doesn't sound like very much, but in Canada, that was the longest sentence ever given in Canadian history for crimes like this. But unfortunately, with Canada's laws, this meant that he didn't have to serve that much time for what he had done to his own children, to all of these kids for so many years, to all the random people he had victimized during the break-ins. And in 2012, he was allowed to walk free from prison after only serving 21 years. He was paroled out. And that's what led the Toronto Police Department, like I said at the beginning, to release a public safety warning, warning people that this guy was out of prison, he was walking amongst them, and that they didn't know what he was going to do next. So at the end of the day, if his sentences would have been imposed consecutively instead of concurrently, he would have been in prison for 180 years, meaning he would have died in prison. But since they don't do that in Canada, he only ended up serving those 21 years. Now, there is a little silver lining. Shortly after his release, he was re-arrested for breaking the terms of his parole. And at the time, he was on chemical castration drugs. He was actually urging his doctor to give him less of them. But since he was a first-time offender, as they called him back in '93 when he was sentenced, he was released shortly after violating the terms of his parole. And once again, he is somewhere out in Canadian society doing God knows what. I just thought I should make this TikTok to let you guys know that he is out there. And he's dangerous. He is a terrible human being. I'm urging you, if you want to read more about this case, to look up the news article. It is one of the most disgusting things I've ever read. And yeah, this guy is really worst of the worst. I can't think of a worse individual than this guy.